captives. It was one day when Mother had gone to Maidbridge. She had gone alone, but the children were to go to the station to meet her. And, loving the station as they did, it was only natural that they should be there a good hour before there was any chance of Mother's train arriving, even if the train were punctual, which was most unlikely. No doubt they would have been just as early, even if it had been a fine day, and all the delights of woods and fields and rocks and rivers had been open to them. But it happened to be a very wet day, and, for July, very cold. There was a wild wind that drove flocks of dark purple clouds across the sky, like herds of dream elephants, as Phyllis said, and the rain stung sharply so that the way to the station was finished at a run. Then the rain fell faster and harder and beat slantwise against the windows of the booking office and of the chill place that had general waiting room on its door. "It's like being in a besieged castle," Phyllis said. "Look at the arrows of the foe striking against the battlements." "It's much more like a great garden squirt," said Peter. They decided to wait on the upside, for the down platform looked very wet indeed, and the rain was driving a little black shelter where down passengers have to wait for their trains. The hour would be full of incident and of interest, for there would be 2 up trains and 1 down to look at before the one that should bring Mother back. "Perhaps it'll have stopped raining by then," said Bobby. "Anyhow, I'm glad I brought Mother's weather waterproof and umbrella." They went into the desert spot labeled General Waiting Room, and the time passed pleasantly enough in a game of advertisements. You know the game, of course. It is something like Tom Crambo. The players take it in turns to go out and then come back and look as like some advertisement as they can, and the others have to guess what advertisement it is meant to be. Bobby came in and sat down under Mother's umbrella and made a sharp face, and everyone knew she was the fox who sits under the umbrella advertisement. Phyllis tried to make a magic carpet of Mother's waterproof, but it would not stand out stiff and raft-like as a magic carpet should, and nobody could guess it. Everyone thought Peter was carrying things a little too far when he blacked his face all over with coal dust and struck a spidery attitude and said he was the blot that advertises somebody's blue-black writing fluid. It was Phyllis's turn again, and she was trying to look like the Sphinx that advertises, what's-his-name, personally conducted tours when the sharp tinge of the signal announced the up train. The children rushed out to see it pass. On its engine were the particular driver and fireman who were now numbered among the children's dearest friends. Courtesies passed between them. Jim asked after the toy engine, and Bobby pressed on his acceptance a moist, greasy package of toffee that she had made herself. Charmed by this attention, the engine driver consented to consider her request that some day he would take Peter for a ride on the engine. "Stand back, mates," cried the engine driver suddenly, and off she goes. And sure enough, off the train went. The children watched the tail lights of the train till it disappeared round the curve of the line, and then turned to go back to their dusty freedom of the general waiting room and the joys of the advertisement game. They expected to see just 1 or 2 people at the end of the procession of passengers who had given up their tickets and gone away. Instead, the platform round the door of the station had a dark blot round it. It was a crowd of people. "Oh!" cried Peter, with a thrill of joyous excitement. "Something's happened. Come on." They ran down the platform. When they got to the crowd, they could, of course, see nothing but the damp backs and elbows of the people on the crowds outside. Everybody was talking at once. It was evident that something had happened. It's my belief he's nothing worse than a natural, said a farmer-looking person. Peter saw his red, clean-shaven face as he spoke. If you ask me, I should say it was a police court case, said a young man with a black bag. Not it, the infirmary, more like. Then the voice of the station master was heard, firm and official. Now then, move along here. I'll attend to this, if you please. But the crowd did not move, and then came a voice that thrilled the children through and through, for it spoke in a foreign language, and more, it was a language that they had never heard. They had heard French spoken, and German. Aunt Emma knew German, and used to sing a song about bedeuten and Zeiten and bin and sin. Nor was it Latin. Peter had been in Latin for 4 terms. It was comfort, anyhow, to find that none of the crowd understood the foreign language any better than the children did. What's he saying? Asked the farmer heavily. Sounds like French to me, said the station master, who had once been to Boulogne for the day. It isn't French, cried Peter. What is it then? Asked Morse. The crowd fell back a little to see who had spoken, and Peter pressed forward so that when the crowd closed up again, he was in the front rank. I don't know what it is, said Peter, but it isn't French. I know that. Then he saw what it was that the crowd had for its centre. It was a man, the man, Peter did not doubt, who had spoken in that strange tongue. A man with long hair and wild eyes, with shabby clothes of a cut Peter had not seen before, a man whose hands and lips trembled and who spoke again as his eyes fell on Peter. No, it's not French, said Peter. Try him with French if you know so much about it, said the farmer man. Parlez-vous français? Began Peter boldly, and the next moment the crowd recoiled again, for the man with the wild eyes had left leaning against the wall, and had sprung forward and caught Peter's hands, and began to pour forth a flood of words which, though he could not understand a word of them, Peter knew the sound of. There, said he, and turned, his hands still clasped in the hands of the strange shabby figure, to throw a glance of triumph at the crowd. There, that's French. What does he say? I don't know. Peter was obliged to own it. Here, said the station master again. You move on, if you please. I'll deal with this case. A few of the more timid or less inquisitive travellers moved slowly and reluctantly away, and Phyllis and Bobby got near to Peter. All 3 had been taught French at school. How deeply they now wished that they had learned it. Peter shook his head at the stranger, but he also shook his hands as warmly and looked at him as kindly as he could. A person in the crowd, after some hesitation, said suddenly, "No comprenez," and then in moments of great need, we can do one. Inside the station master's room, Bobby still held the stranger's hand and stroked his sleeve. Here's a go, said the station master. No ticket. Doesn't even. All the children pleaded at once, and suddenly Bobby got between the others and the stranger, for she had seen that he was crying. By a most unusual piece of good fortune, to hear her. I'm sure he hasn't done anything like you're sent to prison for, said Peter. Looks like without visible means to me, said the station master. Well, I don't mind giving. So she said, all right. They showed him an Italian stamp, and pointed from him, and made signs of questions with their eyebrows. He shook his head. Then they showed him a Norwegian stamp, the common blue kind it was, and again he signed no. Then they showed him a Spanish one, and at that he took the envelope from Peter's hand and searched among the stamps with a hand that trembled, the hand that he reached out at. The train from Maidbridge was signalled. "I'll stay with him till you bring Mother in," said Bobby. "You're not afraid, Missy?" Oh no, all the things she could see were men's clothes, and the name marked on the shirt was Father's name. Then Father hadn't taken his clothes with him, and that nightshirt was one of Father's new. Clasping arms around her waist, and whispered, "Mother, Daddy isn't dead, is he? My darling, no. What made you think of anything so horrible?" I heard from him last," she said, "and he'll come back to us some day. Don't fancy such horrible things, darling." Later on, when the Russian Mother, tell us all about the Russian gentleman. A white shape hopped into the room. It was Peter, dragging his coat behind him like the tail of a white peacock. Better and happier. If one did, one was sent to prison. "But they can't," said Peter. "People only go to prison when they've done wrong, or when the judges think they've done wrong," said Mother. "It's all horribly true. Well then, well, then they took him out,